It has been said that the story of Florida's state parks is the story of Florida. A story that reaches back in time like the roots of an ancient oak tree. It began as a quest to conserve the natural places for future generations and endured as the story of men and women who struggled to preserve what are and will forever be the heart and soul of Florida. This is the story of Florida's state parks. In 1970, the Florida Park Service began a period of unprecedented growth as a statewide system of parks began to take shape under the leadership of the Florida Park Service's 7th director, Nay Landrum. Florida's natural landscapes were rapidly becoming targets for development, leading the Park Service to move quickly to identify and acquire some of the state's best lands before they were gone. Payne's Prairie was acquired by the Florida Park Service in 1970. As Florida's first preserved state park, its 21,000 acres are the site of a rich cattle ranching tradition that reaches back to the early Spaniards and Seminole Indians. In the spring of 1774, the English botanist William Bartram traveled through Florida during his grand exploration of the southeastern United States. In his book Travels, Bartram wrote about Payne's Prairie and its diversity of plants and animals.
William Bartram is sort of the patron saint of Payne's Prairie. We walk in his footsteps. Whatever he was doing here, it's kind of like what we're doing. He is a naturalist like we're naturalists. And he said about this place right behind me, a group of rocky hills almost surrounds a large basin, which is the general receptacle of the water, draining from every part of the vast savanna by lateral conduits winding about, and one after another joining the main creek or general conductor, which at length delivers them into this sink, where they descend by slow degrees through rocky caverns into the bowels of the earth, whence they are carried by secret subterranean channels into other receptacles and basins.
We kind of targeted that description for how we would manage the prairie. What was our target for management? Payne's Prairie, I would say, is the single most difficult state park to manage because of the wetland prairie or marsh.
Florida naturalists like Archie Carr assisted the Park Service in finding answers to its land management questions.
Where do we go from here? And how do we manage? And what's the first steps? And what do we do? And Archie looked at me and he said, Ellison, to manage Payne's Prairie, you're going to have the patience of Job and the wisdom of Solomon, and I'll never forget it.
The plan to restore the prairie included the decision to re-establish a bison herd.
Nat Reed, with the support of Nay Landrum, arranged for a donation of 10 bison from Wichita National Wildlife Refuge. And we had this idea it would be good to introduce that once native animal back to Payne's Prairie State Preserve. Well, this fellow by the name of Elmer Parker was the bison buffalo man at Wichita, and so I asked him 10,000 questions for about 3 days about how do you manage a bison. We loaded him in a gooseneck trailer and headed back to Florida, and he put his hand on the shoulder and he said, son, that was a few years ago, he says, son, you've asked me a lot of questions about buffalo. You can do anything in the world with a buffalo that he wants to do.
Wild horses known as cracker ponies also roam the prairie as a living cultural link to the past.
Once you hear a sandhill crane, you know what they sound like forever. We have cranes here all year round, but in the winter, we get all the migrants from the original snowbirds from northern Michigan and southern Canada and Minnesota and Wisconsin. The cranes are our reward for doing the right things at Payne's Prairie.
It's probably one of the more unique resources in the state. That uniqueness is its diversity and its dynamics. It just changes over day and overnight.
There's nowhere else in the world where you can see in the shadow of a city like Gainesville the wildlife and the abundance and diversity of wildlife like we have here. You take a step and you're in it.
During the administration of Nay Landrum, during the 70s and 80s, some really fantastic parks were purchased. As these came on board, we had to figure out how to manage them, what was the best public use to allow in them, how to protect them. So it was a challenging time, but very rewarding to see these previously just natural lands all of a sudden become a state park.
Although a park superintendent named Carlos Maxwell experimented with fire to maintain the natural landscape, there had been no resource management program in the state park system prior to the 1970s.
Fire in Florida's landscape is just as important as rainfall. And if you remove the fire, the forest changes, and it becomes more hazardous to wildfire. In other words, the more fuel you have when a lightning strike comes, and Florida's the lightning capital of the United States. When you get that lightning strike with all that fuel, you can just have a out-of-control wildfire that can't be stopped. Fire in the woods was the enemy. The park system had been part of the Florida Forest Service for a period of time. So the Forest Service philosophy was the Smokey the Bear philosophy, and that meant fire in the woods was bad. So every time a fire occurred in the woods, we just literally risked life and limb to get out there to extinguish it. And for these naturalists to start saying that we needed to burn the woods, that was heresy. And that was a difficult pill for them to swallow. All the plants and animals are adapted to fire. The nesting seasons, everything is adapted to natural fires. If you're going to have a healthy forest, it can't be healthy without fire.
Despite internal resistance, the Florida Park Service conducted its first prescribed burn at Falling Waters State Park, sparking a resource management policy used today throughout the state park system. But Falling Waters State Park may be better known for its unusual geography and a 70-foot waterfall, the tallest in Florida.
We just completed a Phase 1 archaeological survey, and we did find quite a few artifacts, spear points, arrowheads, some pretty ornate pottery. People coming to see the sinkholes and the waterfall today, you know, it's amazing to see that kind of thing in Florida. You can imagine what it must have been like for the Indian. It would have had to have been just breathtaking. So I'm sure that it had a lot of sacred meanings to the Native Americans.
The Florida Park Service continued its quest to preserve Florida's cultural history. In 1973, the Barnacle State Historic Site was added to the system.
The Monroe family had lived here since the 1890s, and nobody else in Miami I've ever known has lived in the same place since 1890s. The Monroe family really wanted this preserved. Now, the man next door was trying to buy it, and he actually did this plan that showed the Barnacle as a clubhouse surrounded by 4 high-rises. So that spurred everyone into action to try to preserve this really pristine piece of the era of the bay.
Today, the Washington's Birthday Regatta is a link to the early history of Miami and Biscayne Bay.
I know there are a lot of boat people come here, almost like coming to a shrine to see where Ralph Monroe was. It's a wonderful thing to have a sailboat race again.
Meanwhile, the struggle for preservation had gained momentum in the western Everglades. In the early 1960s, a large tract of cypress swamp known as the Fakahatchee Strand was purchased by a developer.
They were incredible salesmen. But they weren't in the business of building anything. They were in the business of buying raw land cheap, promoting the heck out of it, and selling it at a big profit. And they bought all the Fakahatchee. Mel Finn, who really deserves all the credit for preserving the Fakahatchee. In '62, Mel organized the Florida Nature Conservancy, and his goal became to preserve the Fakahatchee. My concern was, let's save the damn place. You know, let's get it in public ownership. You know, let's let the people have it and preserve it.
Franklin Adams is the person that brought Mel Finn into the Fakahatchee for the first time for Mel Finn. And people, including Franklin, will say that the reason Fakahatchee is preserved in the condition it is in is because of the dogged persistence of Mel Finn. He would not give up. He would not see any negatives. He just wasn't going to allow that, and that kept him going. That optimism kept him going, because it really was kind of against all odds to try to save this place. And Mel said, well, you just got to go see it for yourself. All the tremendous tropical epiphytes out there in the water, and just the peace and the solitude and the wilderness-like experience that you can have out here.
In '71, though, Mel's wife Margie called me and said, Mel's not having him feeling good. They've diagnosed him with serious heart problems. He wouldn't know it to look at him, and he's going to have surgery.
Mel Finn passed away 2 weeks after surgery, never to see his dream fulfilled. But in 1974, as part of a settlement in an environmental lawsuit, the land came into state ownership, and the Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park became the 89th unit in Florida's state park system.
People never forgot Mel. He was living proof that without one man's efforts, we probably would have lost this place, or what we might have ended up with would just have been a piecemeal remnant.
I love sharing some of the wonders of Fakahatchee with people on swamp walks. So again, I would attribute this privilege that I have of being the bark biologist here at Fakahatchee to Mel Finn and to Franklin Adams. All right here we have an adult Florida panther track. These are very recent, possibly in the last day or two. Very fresh. Fakahatchee is one of the few Florida state parks that you can regularly find Florida panther tracks, including bear tracks for that matter too. So it is a very special place, even for those charismatic megafauna. As well as all those endangered epiphytes too. And it also is the orchid capital of the United States, with 44 native species of orchids having been discovered here. It is the largest strand swamp in the world. And this one being 19 miles long and 3 to 5 miles wide and 3 to 6 feet deep, makes it really the Grand Canyon of the Everglades. Also, it's the largest unit in the Florida Park Service. The optimum boundary covers about 85,000 acres. One of the really special plants that we get to study here at Fakahatchee is the ghost orchid. And that, for a plant, is one of our most charismatic, especially when it blooms. For a week or two, it steals the ball. It really is the Cinderella of orchids. The prairies out here in the Everglades, they're burned fairly frequently from lightning fires. The Muhlenbergia, or muhly grass. It's kind of pinkish purple when it blooms. The Fakahatchee Strand population of native royal palms is the largest in the United States. It's really a sliver of the tropics, and I call it Florida's Amazon. We're like part of a Lewis and Clark expedition taking these notes. We hope that as the years go by, the notes get copied and can be valuable as they look back 20, 30, 40 years from now and see what it was like when we were exploring it.
William Bartram wrote about Florida's freshwater springs during his expedition in 1774.
Some of the places that he visited are now state parks, like Blue Spring on the St. Johns River and Manatee Springs on the Swanee River. Florida has perhaps the largest number of springs to be found in any state or country. And we have the largest number of first magnitude springs of any state or country. And a first magnitude spring is one that produces 65 million gallons or more a day. So these are the really big ones like Silver Springs and Manatee Springs. And Manatee Spring was the first spring to be protected by the state of Florida. Ishtutney Springs and Wakulla Springs are two of the finest, and two that I work on to this day to try to protect them and restore their health.
We're currently sitting in the grounds of Wakulla Springs State Park, and it is a very significant property. It was developed by Ed Ball, who was basically the head of St. Joe Paper Company out of Jacksonville. And this was built as a sort of an attraction retreat in part for Ed Ball and his folks, but also the lodge was built for people to be able to come and enjoy the spring. And of course, Ed Ball and the company bought this property to basically preserve it. So one of the things that was important about this acquisition, and it was a beginning of a series of acquisitions like this, was purchasing lands around significant Florida springs. And this was part of a series of projects to try to acquire spring heads to preserve the water quality, preserve the beauty of the area. This is a very significant part of our attempts to try to protect and preserve those quality springs in Florida.
In 1986, the springs and lodge became the Edward Ball Wakulla Springs State Park.
Starting in the 1970s, as the historic preservation movement in America really came into its own, professionals in the field began to understand the technologies needed to stabilize and restore historic properties. That began to be applied in state parks for the first time in 1974-75. It was really sort of led by Herschel Shepard, a significant architect from Jacksonville, who was really one of Florida's first truly historic preservation architects, and taught the Park Service how to begin to treat the buildings properly. The lodge is historic. It's sort of a piece of Florida history that you don't find very much anymore, these small lodges that were pretty typical in the 1930s and 40s for people to come and visit, and we just don't have very many of them left in Florida. So this is a very significant site.
In 1972, the Ranger Academy was created to prepare future generations of rangers for their demanding assignments in the state parks.
When you're living on a park, you're never quite off the clock. Maybe you work 8 to 5 on a Saturday, but then you go home, but a camper has a problem. They're out of gas, there's a fire, somebody gets bit by a snake. You're on the clock again. You're always on. And again, it becomes more than just a job. It really becomes a bit of a way of life.
They tell us in Ranger Academy something that we already knew, and that this is not a job, this is a lifestyle. We choose to live and breathe this particular type of job every day. And when I'm not working, I'm thinking about working.
One night I got a call. I'd been here probably very long, a year or so maybe. It was like midnight and shots fired on the west side of the park, so I get in my car and I go out to see if I could find out what was going on. I got out in the woods in one of the fire lanes and I tried to listen to see if I could hear anything. I couldn't, so I cut my car off and I got out, and it was so dark I couldn't see the hand in front of my face. And I'm thinking, what am I doing out here? I can't see nothing. They could be standing right in front of me, I wouldn't know it. So, I said to myself, I think I'm going home.
There's something unique about the Florida Park Service. One of the only things that's consistent in your life are your fellow employees, other rangers, park managers. You really do begin to form a family. And it is interesting that when people retire after 30, 40 years, they join groups like the Florida Alumni Group, and they continue to volunteer in state parks. And again, you don't see this for the Department of Agriculture or the Florida State Archives. When you're done, you're done. And it's very different here.
As senior members of the Park Service began to retire, an idea was conceived to form an Old Rangers Club, known today as the Florida Park Service Alumni Association.
$14, do I hear 15?
The Alumni Association sponsors social events and raises funds to help Park Service employees in need through its James Cook Memorial Relief Fund.
Used to be called
William Maxwell and his son Clifton are the second and third generations of a Park Service family that began when Carlos Maxwell became the first superintendent of Olino State Park. William Maxwell remembers his father's accomplishments with the Florida Park Service.
The bridge and the rec hall were pretty much finished up at the same time. That was along the end of the CCC era.
In recognition of his distinguished character and accomplishments, the Florida Park Service Alumni Association created the Carlos Maxwell Award to recognize outstanding achievement by individuals in the Florida Park Service. Following his retirement in 1989, Nay Landrum served as the executive director of the National Association of State Park Directors and has been called the father of the modern Florida State Park system.
I said to Nay Landrum, I think at his retirement party, what's this mean to the Park Service? That all the knowledge and experience is leaving. He said, that's why we have y'all around. Y'all are filling our shoes. And I'm like, well, that's a heavy burden. So I'm thinking, maybe he's right. Maybe we are the leaders now.
Fran Manella became director of the Florida Park Service in 1989, following the retirement of Nay Landrum. Manella served for 12 years as head of the Florida Park Service. In 2001, President George Bush appointed her director of the National Park Service.
One of the big successes that came out of a negative situation such as Hurricane Andrew and the fact that we are in such financial challenges is the fact that our Friends of Florida State Parks formed a statewide Friends organization that I think helped us become the best state park system in this country. Plus, it increased our volunteers.
Volunteer groups called citizen support organizations help the state parks through fundraising and hands-on work projects.
In '93 it was determined that a statewide organization should be established to help support the efforts of the local CSOs as well as look at statewide issues that affect Florida state parks.
Florida has the largest state park volunteers program in the nation. Over 1 million hours of volunteer time, and I would venture to say that there's no one else that comes even close to that.
More than 160 state parks are the legacy of the Florida Park Service, and the visionary Floridians who look beyond the realities of the Great Depression and the challenging times that followed to preserve these parts of natural Florida for all people, for all time.
These parks are an irreplaceable treasure. They are more precious than the crown jewels because they have intrinsic values that the jewels do not.
I think today we look at state parks as some of the last remaining areas where you see the real Florida, normal Florida, the Florida as it used to be. And Florida Park is one of the only places you can go and see native wildlife, see a stream or a spring.
Home is where you start from and the things you carry about. But this is my home, and it's part of Florida, the Florida that is my home. I raised my 2 boys here. They come to know and understand and love this river as much as I do, and many of the people who live here do. This is Florida. You know, whether it's in South Florida or Central Florida, here or in West Florida, this is essentially a part of our soul, and it's something we've got to remember.